All right, well, thanks for having me here, everybody. There are various levels of crazy when you talk about grad school, all right? But going to grad school is its own level of crazy. Doing joint degrees, you've got your layers. A JD MBA is one layer, but I had classmates who were doing JD MDs, that's a layer, doctor and lawyer. MD, MBA, that's a degree of crazy. And then I had a friend in Boston who was doing an MD, PhD. And I decided she took the cake on the layer of crazy. So, you know, we just do what we do. I'm a little bit intimidated by the fact that I am the first speaker, so I don't know if that's good for me or bad for me. Also, that you have to use 2 direct quotes. That's good luck with that. I hope I give you something meaningful in this. So this is going to be a little bit of an interesting hodgepodge because my professional background has been kind of all over the place. So before I kind of dive into this, I just want to get a sense of you guys and your background. So this is the Business Leaders Forum. How many of you already own your own business? Anyone? Okay, we got someone back here. How many of you want to own your own business? Okay, we've got hands. What interested you in this class? Like, what was it about this class that was interesting to you? Yeah.
Networking, so was my first and foremost, just with fellow classmates as well as business leaders and people in the industry.
Yeah.
That's kind of the big thing for me.
Okay, great. And tell me your name.
Weston Blanford.
Weston. Okay. You're gonna like today then. That's great.
Sounds good.
Anyone else? What interested you? Yeah.
I have a foundation, so I'm creating foundation for kids with disabilities.
Great.
So I thought like meeting you guys will help me to have an idea and having connection with
Yeah. Okay, terrific. So a little bit on the networking side here too. That works. Anybody else? Yeah.
I thought it'd be interesting to learn from people in all different aspects of business and how they've found to be successful.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
could maybe apply it in networking also.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is great. This theme's gonna work. And tell me your name.
Luke.
Luke. And what was your name?
Angel.
Angel. Okay. All right. Anybody else before we move on? Have a burning passion for why they signed up for this class, other than maybe you just needed a credit or however many credits this is. I know that too. Yeah, that's all right. I've been there. All right. So let me just. Oh wait, where's the computer? Over there. Where do I
try it?
There we go. All right, so let me give you a little bit about my background and kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. So, was read in the bio. I'm from Salt Lake originally, grew up here, went to college at BYU, studied business, and worked here for about 5 years, then went back to DC for grad school, then up to Boston, and then back to Salt Lake. The reason some of that came about, when I was in college, partway through college, I decided I wanted to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I was sent out to Virginia. And my mission president happened to be Spencer Kirk. I don't know if you know that name, but he's the guy who was president of Extra Space Storage for many, many, many years. And he still, I think, is the single largest shareholder of Extra Space Storage, even though it's now a public company. So he's worth like millions of dollars, which of course I found out much later. Before you leave a mission, you usually have an exit interview with your mission president. We just kind of go over your time in the mission and give you advice before you go home and all sorts of things. Well, my mission president was really big on education. He said, look, the world's changing, business is changing, industry is changing. It's important that you go home and get an education. Because education is the thing that's going to drive the world in the years to come, and you need to know how to operate within the world. And so his thing was to try and commit each of us to get 1 degree more than we were originally planning, right? So if you're going to go for an associate's, go get a bachelor's. If you're going to go get a bachelor's, get a master's, etc. Well, at the time, I was in the middle of my bachelor's in business and just thought, all right, I didn't know what I was going to do after that. I was a typical nerd in school, and I was kind of terrified of graduating because I didn't know how to deal with life that didn't have school involved. I mean, sorry guys, really nerdy here. And so I thought, oh, all right, I could go get a master's. I could do that. And that set me on a course where I started thinking about what am I going to do if I go get a master's degree? And, I was studying business, so an MBA kind of made sense. I briefly thought about the law, then I thought, no, law school sounds like the worst thing on the planet. I don't have any intention of going to law school. But when I graduated from BYU in 2008, it was in the middle of the recession, or right at the beginning of the recession, right? And at the time, I wanted to go into venture capital and deal with investing in businesses and working with startup companies. But being 2008, that was not going to happen. Like, just not the time to go into venture capital. And so instead, I went to work for this startup in the health insurance world. It was a private Medicare exchange. And I was there when the Affordable Care Act was passed. And when the Affordable Care Act was passed, insurance exchanges became a huge deal because all of a sudden, everyone was going to the individual market to get insurance for Medicare, and you needed to have a place where people could go to explore different plans. So our business exploded. And I had a lot of fortune in being close to the leaders of that business and getting a lot of really interesting opportunities as a result. I would travel with our sales team across the country to pitch to really big name companies and explain to them our operational model and try to convince them to help us move their retirees from group healthcare to the individual market. And so I just got a lot of exposure to a lot of different people. But this whole time I'm thinking, okay, I've agreed to do this master's. I've got to think about how to do this. With an MBA, a lot of times it's good to have some work experience before you go get an MBA. So as time went on and I started getting closer and closer to the time to get ready for that, again, being a product of the recession, I'm thinking, there's so many people who go get an MBA and they can't get jobs. I know a lot of friends who graduate law school and they can't get jobs. What am I going to do with this? Is an MBA kind of the new bachelor's in business? What does it really give me? What is it really worth? And I happened to be sitting in a meeting with one of the main sales guys that I would travel with. And he had been a lawyer at one point, moved into the business world, and said, and he loved to throw that out in meetings, oh, back in my time, in my time as a lawyer and, back in my days practicing law, because he knew that it just made these clients feel really comfortable with him and feel like he knew what he was talking about, right? Definitely know how to leverage that. Anyway, so I'm sitting there listening to him make this pitch. And all of a sudden I thought, you know what? Maybe an MBA isn't going to do it for me. Maybe a law degree isn't going to do it for me. But if I combine them, all of a sudden I have something really valuable that not a lot of people have. And that will set me apart, even in times of economic downturn. That's how I ended up on the JD MBA. And then it was kind of well, if I'm going to go big or go home, I might as well actually go big or go home and leave the state. I've been debating doing executive MBA programs, all that kind of stuff. But you can't really do that with a 4-year JD MBA program. So I quit my job, moved to DC, and that's kind of how I got on that train. We are going to talk a little bit about the legal stuff today and how that interacts with business. I'm a corporate attorney. We're going to talk about what that means. We're also going to talk a little bit about politics, and we're going to have some fun at the end of the class, playing around with some political stuff. And I'm not afraid to do that because I'm currently running for office, as you heard. And so hopefully this is a place where we can have some fun talking about some political things as well. I'm also happy to answer questions as we go. So you don't have to hold them if you have questions as we're going, feel free to jump in. All right. So let's talk about life as a lawyer. Everybody thinks that I am in court all the time as a lawyer. That is a false statement. As a corporate attorney, I never go to court. In fact, I don't think I've been inside of a courtroom other than as an intern, just to watch and see what other people are doing. But I don't know anything about going to court. I don't care about litigation. It's not the thing that interested me. Corporate law deals with businesses. It deals with all the stuff that a business encounters on a day-to-day basis. It's a relatively broad area. You can have your general corporate law, which is if you're going to start a business, how do you do that, right? How do you form an entity? How do you create bylaws or an operating agreement? How do you negotiate with your business partners to deal with the stuff that could happen down the road if things go really bad? There's a lot of contract law involved. So a lot of like general counsel, people who work in-house, you're doing contracts, you're negotiating contracts with vendors and suppliers or with customers on a regular basis. My particular area of focus was mergers and acquisitions. So buying and selling companies, that's what I was helping clients do. And I work on the buy side and the sell side. On the buy side, we worked with a lot of private equity firms and kind of middle market investors who would go in and either acquire a minority interest in a company or just acquire a company outright. And on the sell side, you're usually working with entrepreneurs who are selling their business for the first time. So a lot of interesting dynamics that come with that. My job becomes one principally of negotiation and advice. You know, the business folks tend to work out their own terms, sometimes with the help of attorneys. And then our job is to paper up those terms. Say, okay, you've agreed that you're going to sell the business for $50 million, but in doing that, you're going to set part of it aside in an escrow account because you're worried about these things that may hit down the road, and you want to hold that money in case you need it to pay out this sales tax that you're behind on or something like that, right? So negotiating all those in a purchase agreement for an M&A deal, you've got a long list of what's called reps and warranties, where the seller has to basically say, I represent that the following information is true. And it can be things like, we pay our employees according to the law. The owners of our business are the actual owners and no one else has a claim on the business. All of our technology is up to date and we haven't had any security hacks or data leaks or things like that. If you're in the healthcare business, there's a whole bunch of regulatory stuff you have to be concerned about. You know, you've followed all the laws, all that kind of stuff. So we help advise clients to say, okay, have you actually done all of this? Or are there things that we need to disclose to the buyer and let them know? And usually they're not deal killers, but things that the buyer needs to be aware of so that down the road, the buyer can't come back against you and file a claim and say, you misled me on this information, now I'm going to sue you for fraud, right? So that's how the M&A world works. They're usually one-time transactions. And so you're kind of constantly out there in the business world, networking, interacting with people, and you start to kind of develop a little bit of a relationship as an M&A attorney. And on the buy side, if you're working with private equity companies, then you've got kind of a regular rotation that they go through where they are bringing things to you. So anyway, that's kind of how that works. Any questions on how the M&A stuff works? Yeah.
M&A, what is that? What is the acronym for that?
Mergers and acquisitions.
Okay, gotcha.
Fun fact, one time I told someone that I worked in mergers and acquisitions and they said, did you say murders and acquisitions? And I was like, no, those are very, very different things. And I do not deal with murder. That would be your public defenders and your prosecutors. All right, so that's the world of corporate law. So if you guys go out and you start your own business, you're working with a business, at some point you're likely going to run across a corporate attorney, and this is what they do. Okay. Just so you have a little bit of a sense of how law firms actually work. There's a structure within a law firm. You've got associates and partners, and you come in, you're a first year associate, and then each year you kind of, I'm a second year, a third year, et cetera. And around the time you hit about 8 years, you start to be ready to be up for partner. They're called partners because they're actually partners in a limited partnership. So the entity of a law firm is a limited partnership. So that's why you always see like an LP or an LLP on the end of a law firm's name. That's what it stands for. And so when you become a partner, you actually buy into the ownership of the firm, and you are technically an owner, a partner with all of the other partners in the firm. So at a law firm, you typically don't work alone, depending on the firm you're at. You work in teams. So I am a senior associate, so I'm in kind of that upper level area, getting close to time for partnership. And typically on a team, I would work with a partner and then work with a junior associate, someone who's in their first or second year. And we each have different responsibilities in the deal to help things move forward. The junior partners help kind of run some of the project management. We usually have checklists, stuff that has to get done, and they help with all the diligence on the company to make sure that those reps and warranties are actually true. the senior managers or senior attorneys and the partners work with the managers of the company to negotiate the purchase agreement and a lot of the other ancillary documents that are there. So you're usually working together with people in a team structure, but it's kind of loose and you kind of find your partners that you like, who like you, and then you work with them. So it's a different structure than kind of your typical business. I'm sure that's fascinating for all of you, but it's there. Law is a service. So in the services industry, right, you're talking about accounting, you're talking about law, consulting, all of these are services business. You typically pay by the hour for your services businesses, right? You're not going to go to an accountant and pay a one-time fee. You're going to pay by the hour usually. What that means, though, on the other end, is that if you're a lawyer, if you're an accountant, if you're a consultant, you're typically on call all the time because people are paying pretty high rates for you to come in and provide them advice. And so they expect you to be accessible when you need that. My rate, my rate is like in the $450 range right now. It's $450 an hour. A lot of our partners are up in the $600 to $800 range. And my firm is a mid-level firm. The firm I came from, Goodwin Proctor, there were partners that I worked with there who were like $1,000 an hour plus. So yeah, so you're on call all the time. Did I see a question over here? No? Okay. And then referral business. I would be very surprised. Have any of you ever heard the name of my firm, Dorsey and Whitney? Yeah. No one go out, like typically for firms like mine, you don't go out and advertise because it's all based on referrals, right? Because of the high rates that you pay, it all is based on who you know and networking within the industry. So you'll see lawyers show up at events. You'll see them inviting people out to their own events. We always have a zoo night that we invite all of our clients to where we rent out the zoo. But it's all based on referrals. So word of advice to you guys, if you ever need a lawyer, find a friend who's a lawyer and ask them for a referral because they'll know how to find someone who can do whatever it is you need done. If they aren't the person who can do it. The only exception to that really are the people who deal with like personal injury type stuff. Right, so that's where you see like the Siegfried and Jensen's, things like that, because they are looking for individual people, their clients are individual people who need help with personal injury claims or medical malpractice type stuff. Whereas for mine, we're working with companies who are finding us through another source. Okay. This is the last boring point, and then we'll get to more interesting things, I promise. The legal market in Salt Lake is interesting. So up until a few years ago, my firm, Dorsey & Whitney, was very much the top of the food chain in Salt Lake. But given the really thriving business community here, we started attracting bigger firms from outside Utah who wanted to come in and have a presence here. So over the last few years, you've seen some pretty big coastal firms move in and establish offices here. In fact, one of the firms, Kirkland & Ellis, they're a Chicago-based firm. They came in and they went through and just poached a bunch of associates out of all of the firms in town, offered them really high coastal salary rates. I mean, we're talking like 200 grand starting salary type stuff, pulled them all out. And so you saw actually some firms collapse or merge with each other because their associates had all been pulled out. It'll be interesting to see over the next few years, depending on how the economy does, if those offices stay and grow, or if they shut their doors. If an economic downturn were to happen, those offices would be the first ones that those firms would close, and then you'd have an influx of lawyers back in the market. So anyway, just kind of fun industry trends. Any questions on what it's like to be a lawyer? Or have I also sufficiently scared you all away? Okay.
Yeah, I had a question
Yeah.
about being a lawyer and like what is expected for the future of the law, I don't know, career. Because AI.
Mhm.
So do you think that AI would replace lawyers and
Yeah.
how law is formed now these days and in the future?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And there are lots of lawyers talking about that right now. I think you will see AI start to replace some of the work that some of those junior associates
Okay.
do. But I don't think it's going to replace lawyers altogether, because when it comes to the law, you're still interpreting the law, right? Even me as a corporate attorney, I've got to understand what the Utah code says about how to form and create an entity, what rights shareholders have, different things like that. And it's hard for AI to like really do that. So I think you're going to see AI have an impact, but I don't think it will fully replace them. Now, there are some really interesting things out there. For example, if you're on a Zoom call with your attorney and AI is creating a script of that call, right? There have been times where attorneys will read through those scripts and it's giving advice that's different than what they actually said.
Okay.
That's an issue, because you're dealing with, malpractice and
Yeah.
confusing legal advice. You also have issues of client confidentiality. What does that do with the AI? And then in the world of patents, if you have a patent on something, or if you have, some piece of software or some, I don't know, whatever it is, and you upload it into ChatGPT because you're trying to do whatever, does that negate the patent? Or what does that do to the confidentiality of the patent that you've just put out there, right? Does it now become part of the AI world? So there are some really interesting questions about AI that are yet to be seen.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, a lot of people are looking very closely at that right now. Yeah. Okay, so because I've had a little bit of a career over a hodgepodge of things, I decided it might be more helpful to you guys if we talked through meaningful life lessons rather than just bore you with details of life in the law. So the first one I want to talk about, and there are really only two, is networking. How do you feel when I say the word networking? What does that bring to mind for you? I know some of you are excited about it, as you mentioned. How many of you, just by raise of hands, just jump for joy when I say the word networking? Okay, we got a few. Wow, good for you guys. How many of you are just like, this is the worst thing in the world. I do not want to talk about this. I can't believe we're here. Okay, we got some honest people. Good. I learned two lessons coming out of law school. The first was the importance of networking, and the second was understanding things from multiple perspectives. So those are the two things we're going to talk about for the rest of the time today. Networking is how the world works. And in business, it's going to mean a lot for you guys, especially when you're dealing with nonprofit organizations, when you're starting a business, when you're just trying to move up in your professional career. Knowing how to network is going to take you farther than almost anything else. You got to be good at what you do, but if you're good at what you do, that alone is not going to get you where you want to go. You've got to know how to work the system. So let's talk about some tips for networking. First one, be intentional. So when I was in law school, they do these things. So when you're, so in law school, when you're a first year, you're called a 1L, and then a second year, you're a 2L, and your third year, you're a 3L. Every summer, they have what's called Rising 2L receptions, where everyone who's between their first and second year can go to law firms and network with people. And it's just a way to kind of like get yourself out there, get to know a little bit about different law firms, meet people, et cetera, before you go and apply for internships. I hated going to those. They were the worst because I didn't know anyone. Law firms look exactly the same when you're trying to just look at them on paper or on their website. And I would just go and eat like some fun food and not know what to do with myself. Well, because I was doing 4 years, I ended up having 2 summers of this. And the second summer, I figured out, okay, if I was going to go to one of these things, I was going to look up online and see which partners were going to be attending and find the ones that were interesting to me. And then when I would go to those events, I would target those people, just go find those people, talk to them. And it didn't matter if I talked to anybody else, as long as I talked to the people who I found interesting, right? Because I didn't care about the litigators, I didn't care about the employment law folks. I just wanted the people who were relevant to me. And that made those so much more meaningful. So when you're going to something, be intentional with it. Find someone who you can talk to. And it doesn't matter how the rest of the event goes, just find one person who you can have a meaningful conversation with. But you've got to be intentional about it. And hold on, I need my notes. I just realized. Give me a second. I wrote down stories to share and then I'm gonna forget them. The other thing too, so as was mentioned, I'm running for Salt Lake County mayor right now. There are a lot of people who live in Salt Lake County. And somehow I've got to figure out how to get to as many of them as possible. So how do I do that, right? Where do I start with that? Well, this last week, a bunch of the legislators in Utah were holding town halls in preparation for the legislative session, which began today up on Capitol Hill. So I've been going to those, and you show up, it's a room full of people, you don't know anyone, and you're trying to figure out, like, how do I make this meaningful? Well, I went to one on Saturday, and the House rep was calling out people in the audience. You know, so-and-so is the mayor of West Jordan, so-and-so is on the city council of West Jordan, and so-and-so is the school board president, et cetera. And I thought, those are the people I want to talk to in the room. And so as soon as the town hall was over, that's who I made a beeline for, right? Okay, mayor of West Jordan, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you about what I'm doing, try and get you on board with what I'm here for. I don't care about anyone else in the room. I do, but those are the people I need to start with, right? Okay. The other thing I'll say with this, with being intentional, is to show up for things. If you have opportunities come your way, volunteer and show up, because the people who show up get the responsibilities and they get noticed. At my law firm a few years ago, they sent around an email saying, hey, there's this organization in Utah called Utah Women Run. And the women lawyers of Utah have had a board seat on that for a while, and the person who's had it is stepping down. It's a group that helps train and support women running for office in Utah. Anybody interested in taking that? And I responded back immediately, and I was like, yes, I will do it. I hadn't run for office at that point, but I was interested in it. I thought, I will do this. And that has opened doors for me, just getting to know a whole bunch of women in Utah's political system across multiple parties who are really engaged and really active. And they can introduce me to other people. But showing up, being there consistently, it'll open crazy doors for you. Again, you got to be intentional with how you do that. Okay, questions, thoughts on that? All right.
Yeah, I have a question. So when I think about networking, for me, it sounds like I have to offer something to someone else, and he will or she will offer something to me. So what advice would you give to someone on their early 20s? Because like the offers that you can share to someone else are dreams, are basically things that I want to do, but are in plan. Like I'm just planning to do it, but like but those are not the things that I'm doing. So what advice would you give?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because you don't actually, so I'm going to answer that over the next 2 points here. The first one is finding mentors, right? So one of the things you can do is you can ask people to be a mentor for you. This applies to this point and the second point. People love to feel important and they love to hear themselves talk. Everybody does. So if you find someone who's really interesting to you in your professional field and you want help or advice, giving them a chance to be a mentor to you actually is something to offer, right? Because people love to find people who they can kind of bring along and support and see shine. And you all, I'm sure, have very interesting backgrounds and stories that are going to be meaningful to someone out there. So find a mentor and just ask them, right? Hey, I want to get into this industry. I'm trying to figure out how to do it. Can you help me? Can you be a mentor to me, right? Ask them to bring you along to events. Ask them to introduce you to people, and find mentors at varying stages. So when I was in law school, you know, I'm the only person in my immediate or extended family who's gone to law school, and one of only a handful that's gone to graduate school. I had no idea what I was doing. No one in my family had any idea what I was doing. I needed people who weren't my family, who could help me get where I needed to go. So I discovered that I needed mentors who were just ahead of me in the process and also mentors who were way far down the road, who had the big names and the big connections. You need both, right? So find someone who's just ahead of you in your professional career. If you're looking at a graduate program, go find a student in that program. Ask them questions about how they got in, questions about when they took certain tests or internships they got. But then also find the people, you know, down the road who can be there for you too. Does that help answer
Yes,
that?
thank
Okay. Like I said, you know, my mission president ended up having this really significant career, and he has become a very important mentor for me, where I called him at certain times since then. So I don't know what to do about this issue. And he's been able to give me some really sound advice that no one in my family would have been able to give me just because of where he is. Okay, and then the next one is ask for advice. This goes along with it. Don't be afraid to ask people for advice. Ask everybody for advice. One of my consultants says, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. People love to give advice. And so just don't be afraid to do it. Let me see if there was anything interesting there that I wanted to share. One of my first bosses out of college just had this incredible ability to talk to people. And one day I was talking to him about it, and I said, Brad, I don't understand where this silver tongue comes from. Like, how do you have this ability to just connect with people? And he kind of just shrugged and looked at me and said, well, there's people. And that was a real like game-changing moment for me to think, like, every person out there is still a human being with their own insecurities, their own fears, their own ambitions and goals. So when you're approaching someone, if you feel really nervous about approaching someone, just remember, they're just a person, just like anybody else, and they're just as scared of something as you might be of them. The only exception I've ever had to that was when I had to ask Gail Miller for money in my last political race. That was a truly terrifying moment. It went well, but it was very scary, and I did not do very well with my own advice on that one. But generally speaking, people are still just people. Okay. All right, I like this one. Just have no shame about it, right? If you're networking, don't be afraid to tell people what you're doing and why you're there. Everybody knows how the game is played. And, you know, like, be tactful and be smart, but be persistent and don't be afraid to ask for what you need, because it's out there, but the world isn't going to hand it to you, right? You've got to be willing to go and ask people for it. And if you do, oftentimes you'll get it. For example, throughout my last campaign, I met a lot of people in the process. It was super great. And I met some just really, really incredible people. But the one person I had not met in that whole process was Governor Cox. And I thought, by day, at some point, I'm going to meet the governor because I really want to meet the governor. And I was at an event with the Republican Party last January, and the governor was there. And it was a smaller event. So I thought, okay, this is my chance. I've got to find a way to meet the governor. But I didn't know if I could just like walk right up to him, or if a security detail would like be all over me. And so I found Amy Winder Newton, who's a member of the county council and is currently in the governor's cabinet. She runs his like family division. I forgot the name of it. Anyway, I knew Amy, and she was kind of standing near the governor. So I went up to her and I said, Amy, I really want to meet the governor. Would you mind introducing me to the governor? She said, sure. And so just brought me over. She said, Governor Cox, I'd like you to meet Erin Rider. She just ran in the 2nd Congressional District and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh yeah, I've heard your name. And anyway, and it was great. And I thought, yes, I finally got to meet the governor. But you just kind of have to have no shame about it, right? Like, if I'd been too nervous or too afraid, I might have missed out on that opportunity. And now down the road, it's helpful, you know, to know, like, I know how to get to the governor. Not that he'll, you know, not that he cares about me at all, but if I needed to, I could. Okay. The next one, don't burn bridges. This is a really big one. People burn bridges a lot. Just remember, every person out there is meaningful in one sense or another and can offer you something. And I don't mean that in a selfish way, but everybody has a really interesting connection to something. And if you burn bridges, you're gonna ruin your reputation and you're gonna burn the bridge to whatever they could connect you to. So when I ran in the second congressional district, I was challenging Chris Stewart, who was the incumbent member of the House. And usually when you challenge an incumbent, you don't have a great relationship with them because you're challenging them and you're trying to oust them from their own seat, right? Well, we made a very intentional decision to not do that and to make it about issues and to not make it about him personally. I could have gone after him personally for a whole bunch of things. John Curtis, who's currently running for the US Senate, told me at one point that when he was first running for, I think, the US House, people made fun of the way he tucked his shirt in, right? Like, people can do weird things all over the place, but we kept it focused on the issues. And then when the race was over and I had lost, I called him that night to concede. And he said, you know, I have to say, I'm really impressed with the fact that you didn't make this personal and you kept it professional and you kept it about the issues. And whatever you do down the road, that's going to take you a long way. Well, now fast forward, and in my current race, it would be really beneficial to me to have Chris Stewart on my side. He's no longer a member of the House. He stepped down. If any of you are paying attention to politics, you might know that. So I went to him like a month or so ago and had lunch with him, and I said, look, I'd like you to be an advisor to my campaign. I'd like you to work with me on my race. And he said, you know, this is a really unusual conversation to be having because you challenged me and there were a lot of things you said about, you know, that you didn't like about how I was working in Congress. But he again reiterated, I'm really impressed with the fact that you didn't make it personal. So he's agreed to be an advisor to my campaign. And that's not a terribly normal thing, but it's going to be really helpful for me down the road. So again, don't burn bridges. Okay, we're almost done with these. Play the long game. Just again, this is all about relationship building. So back to the question about what do you have to offer them? You may not have anything to offer someone today, but you might have something to offer them tomorrow. And if something comes up and you think, hey, this could be useful to you, I'm going to send you this podcast episode that I just heard about your industry that I thought was really interesting, right? Things like that. Playing the long game, staying close to them. I've run into Governor Cox a couple of times since that first event. And each time I'm like, hi, Governor Cox, I'm Erin Rider. We met at that one event. And every time he's like, yeah, I know. And I don't know that he knows. I honestly don't know that he knows, but he says he knows. But, you know, helping people remember that you exist and remembering that this is a long-term thing will help you stay top of mind for them. And letting people know what you want to do, right? Like, hey, I'm interested in politics. I want to run for office at some point. You may not be running now, but down the road, an opportunity might open up and someone might come to you and say, you'd be the perfect person for this. Would you consider running? Or whatever it is, right? Promotions, etc. Okay, the last point, make it fun. When I was in Boston for my internship at the beginning of my time working there, we had tons of networking events. And again, I hated them, I hated all of them. But you go and you hang out with people in the firm. Well, everybody at the firm, not everybody, but you know, there was a lot of alcohol flowing there. And you can probably guess, I don't drink. And I was like, I can only consume so much ginger ale before I just cannot do this anymore. I had coworkers who would go the chocolate milk route, and I was like, we're not 10 years old. I love chocolate milk, but I'm not ordering that at a professional event. So one time we were at this restaurant where they had a full bar, and I went up to the bartender and I said, can you just give me something? Can't have alcohol in it, but like do whatever you want otherwise. And he handed me a goblet, like a legitimate goblet filled with stuff. I don't even know what was in it. There was like mint leaves and like fruit and all sorts of things in this goblet. So I'm like walking around this event holding this goblet, and people were like, what is that? It was a great conversation starter because all of a sudden everyone wanted to know what my drink was. And now I'm finding all the other non-drinkers of the firm because they want to know what I've got. And so things like that, right? It just became a fun way to do it. So every event I went to thereafter, I would try to do the same thing. And it just became this thing where every time I had this really interesting drink and I could talk to people about what I was drinking, and it was a great way to open a conversation. So just try to make it fun. Don't put a lot of pressure on yourselves. Any thoughts, comments about networking before we go? Yes.
So you said that you did a lot of networking through like business events. Do they usually have like for people who aren't part of the business to go to those events?
They can, it depends on the event, yeah, so depending on your industry, there are almost always gonna be things that you can attend, even if you're not employed or, working. So like if you're into technology and you're a woman, we have the Women's Tech Council. They have events all the time. Silicon Slopes does stuff all the time. You just have to find your industry and then you just have to find the one thing that kind of shows you the world of stuff. But there are always things like that are going on. It just depends on what you're looking for. Yeah. But that's where having mentors is helpful because you can ask them, right? How do I get to events where I can go meet people? Okay, anything else on this? Yes.
Talking about telling people what you're doing. I had an experience, like I chose a mentor who were my advisor at work, so I was telling her what I wanted to do. But my advisor would take this idea and then start doing it by herself. So
Oh, yeah, where people are stealing your ideas.
and then she was playing like the boundaries between me and my boss. She didn't want me to meet my boss. So that's kind of
Yeah, I mean, that's not good.
Like, oh, because I was telling what I wanted to do, or so now I'm just kind of confused because from that time, because it was really so bad experience that I decided to not talk anymore. So I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there are bad actors out there, unfortunately. Sometimes you can start out keeping it kind of high level and wait to build up trust with people before you get down into the weeds of what you're doing, right? So if you're interested in the nonprofit world in general, you can tell people, look, I'm really interested in nonprofits and issues that help people with whatever. And just kind of feel someone out and see, give it time, right? And then over time, you just sort of build a relationship with them or not, like, I'm not saying this very well, but there are people out there who really do just want to help. And sometimes you just have to make a few efforts before you find the person who's right. So I would just recommend keep it high level at the beginning. And then as you get to know someone, you find that person, there are other things about confidentiality, but that we can go into, but yeah, generally there are good people out there, I promise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What would be your best advice for someone that you're mentoring?
Just like in general.
Something that you've learned.
Yeah, I'm a little conflicted on this, but I really do think that like showing up for things matters a lot. There's so many people who just don't show up for stuff, right? And especially on a volunteer basis, you can go so far, so fast if you're willing to just be the person who's responsible and show up for stuff.
Is that like actions speak louder than words?
Yeah, and it doesn't take long for people to realize, oh, you're the person who's not, you're not reliable, therefore we're not going to give you the interesting stuff. It's the same at work. The more reliable and dependent you are, the farther you go. But that one really does take you a long way. All right, we're gonna do one more thing before we end here. We don't have a lot of time for this because I talked too long. Sorry, everybody. But I want to do a little bit of a law school scenario here for you. I want you guys, give me an issue. You can make it as complicated, as difficult as you want. And then we're gonna practice for a couple minutes here, talking about that issue from multiple sides. Yeah.
The housing crisis in Utah.
Housing crisis in Utah. Okay. Okay, so Weston, you're gonna be on the hot seat.
All right.
Okay, So give me an argument for why we should build more apartments.
4,
Yeah,
to limit the amount of people that are, especially at this time of year, that are freezing and dying on the streets. We need to build more affordable and plentiful housing that to allow these people to the people that are struggling to have somewhere to live, and despite it oversaturating the housing market.
okay, well, but what if it does oversaturate the housing market? Who pays for these apartments?
This is where politics and then
Yeah.
economics comes in, and I'm not the most with them.
That's okay, you don't have to be an expert at this.
But basically,
Just,
you know, like it's us, you know, it's the taxpayer, it's the people that and wouldn't you want to maybe give a little bit more of what you have been blessed with in order to help somebody else?
Okay, now argue against yourself for a second there. Give me the other side of that.
Well, I understand that, but there's a definite need for reward for hard work, and I feel like the people that are on the street have made choices in their lives that put them in a position and so if I have to use my my hard-earned money, my hard-earned assets to support them when I feel like I shouldn't have to, why would I do that?
Okay, anyone else want to chime in on this for 30 seconds? Yeah,
Alright, so do you want me to go against the house?
pick whichever one you want.
Okay, so I'll look for the 4. So if we encourage people to start building houses or small house living, so you can fit multiple places on a complex, it will increase the supply to help with demand and will hopefully bring down the prices and give more people the opportunity to be able to buy a house.
Okay,
Because it'll be more available.
so now flip it around. Why would that not be the right way to go?
Well, it wouldn't be the right way to go, because if you're still trying to do that, it's not going to satisfy everyone's needs. And it also doesn't help in the long run, because people will still want them, but they won't be able to afford them because the market would have to go down so much, and you could never supply enough houses to bring it down that much that you want.
Okay, interesting. Oh, yes, Angel.
So I believe that there is want and need.
Uh-huh.
So a house is a need, like not when it's like a big house, it's a want. But when it's just like a house where to sleep, it's a need. So it's kind of education. There is taxes for education. So even those who doesn't have kids, they still pay those taxes. And I believe housing, when it's a need, something should be done. Like you don't need just to live in Salt Lake, San Diego, but there is a bunch of states where they can build housing and force those people to work. Because if you don't have a house, how are you going to be able to work?
Okay, so give me the other side of that. Why would you tell people they couldn't have the house they want? Right? Or like, what is the argument for having the house you want, even if it's too big?
By working hard. If you want extra, you have to do it. If you want education, just like a basic, yeah, everybody has access. But if you want to have a law, you have to be lawyer, then you have to pay extra.
Okay.
The point is nobody's gonna be happy. You do one thing, somebody's gonna be mad, you do another thing.
True, but what is the point of this? This is the final comment here. Yes.
It's like forcing critical thinking, which I love, because you're going from one side and you're making us think the other side to think outside the box.
Yeah.
Get a different perspectives. I really enjoyed watching it.
Yeah. I'm sorry we did not have more time for this. Sorry, what?
It's like one side's not always right, like there's good parts in every single side, like you have to be open-minded to that.
Mhm. Yeah, so the reality is that most of the things you're going to face in your life have layers of nuance to them. and there's some element of gray. And if you can't see the gray and appreciate what's going on the other side, you'll be limited in what you can accomplish in business, in your personal life, wherever it is, right? So this is a classic law school thing where professors you'll answer a question and then they'll force you to argue against yourself on the other side. Anytime you come up against an issue like this, do that. Take a second and think through what is the other argument here. You'll be better negotiators, you'll be better business leaders, you'll be better humans, and you'll be more compassionate as a result. Last anecdote, when I was in law school, I was there in the 2016 election when Donald Trump won. Whatever you think of Donald Trump, Georgetown was like a graveyard, an absolute graveyard when he won. And to me, it was a moment, it was one of these moments where I thought, if you can't understand why someone would have voted for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, you have failed law school. You just don't understand the point of what's going on here, right? So anyway, that's all. Thank you so much. This has been great.